And now I would like to introduce the Honorable Marisa Lago, U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce. The floor is yours.
It is such an honor to follow in the footsteps of my valued colleagues from the State Department and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency to make a few remarks about the industrial strategy that the U.S. is pursuing. We all saw during the COVID pandemic that no country should rely exclusively on one source or even one geographic region for supply chains that are critical to our everyday life. In the U.S., we're diversifying our supply chains, including in energy, and we're doing this to safeguard our energy security, which we know is an element of our economic security, and we know that equally that our economic security is fundamental to our national security. Now, in particular, we're diversifying key components of advanced technology supply chains to protect our economic security in light of China's stated intention to leverage supply chain dependencies to threaten and cut off countries during a crisis. And of course, we've seen what Russia has done to weaponize energy supplies against European countries. Now, strengthening U.S. energy security starts by investing at home in U.S. competitiveness. We have had 3 landmark pieces of legislation: the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which are making targeted investments totaling over $1 trillion in U.S. industries and technologies for the future, from clean energy solutions to semiconductors. These historic investments are boosting innovation, they're driving the growth of quality jobs, and they are fueling a clean energy manufacturing boom. The sheer scale of these investments isn't just good for the U.S., they are good for the world. These investments are continuing to position the U.S. as a global leader in technological innovation for the clean energy transition, in addition to strengthening the long-term energy security for the U.S. and our partners in Europe and beyond. History shows that innovation that starts in the U.S. does not stay within our borders, and that is healthy. Now, another benefit is that U.S. breakthroughs are driving down the cost of deploying clean energy solutions around the globe. And these savings mean more clean energy deployment, further cutting emissions and leveraging economies of scale. The reality is that the world currently faces some short-term overcapacity in certain clean energy supply chains, but we also face a long-term imperative to deploy these technologies. That means that private sector companies may be ill-equipped to make critical investment decisions since they're often focused on near-term profits, and that's where economic diplomacy comes in. The U.S. is seeking government-to-government partnerships with countries that recognize the imperative of the clean transition and that are committed to using public tools to fill a near-term investment gap and to mobilize the private sector. Now, in addition to government initiatives, the United States believes that close cooperation between the public and the private sectors is absolutely critical to advance our shared energy security goals. To accelerate the clean energy transition, we as governments must cultivate strong business environments. That includes clear regulatory regimes. These clear rules of the road will allow the private sector effectively to conduct business in international markets and attract investment. The private sector provides expertise, substantial capacity to invest in new infrastructure, and the ingenuity and drive to bring new innovations to market. As we as governments are developing industrial policy, it's critical to work with the private sector to understand supply chain and manufacturing challenges and to ensure that our proposed policies account for the business realities that companies face daily. The private sector ultimately owns and is responsible for supply chains, but the public sector has an important role when they get snarled, as we saw during the pandemic. So across a wide array of activities, from trade missions to senior-level commercial dialogues, the U.S. Department of Commerce is proud to be working with our European partners and the European Commission to deepen public-private engagement that can advance our shared energy security, economic security, and national security goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lago, for your keynote remarks. With that, we will now turn to our first plenary session, the role of industrial policy in strengthening energy security cooperation. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Senior Director and Richard Morningstar Chair for Global Energy Security at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, Mr. Landon Darins.
Well, good morning and welcome to the PTEC Ministerial. I'm Landon Darins, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, and really excited for a conversation on the role of industrial policy in strengthening energy security cooperation across the transatlantic partnership. In her remarks yesterday and today, Secretary Granholm referred to a, quote, unprecedented, unique transformation of U.S. policy to embrace a new industrial policy lens to be an enabler of the energy transition and to strengthen U.S. energy security. Many of us that follow this space are anxiously awaiting a report from Mario Draghi, the former Prime Minister of Italy, on EU competitiveness and a plan for action for the EU as well. Whether through the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Green Industrial Plan in the European Union, the U.S. and the EU are taking steps to secure energy security and accelerate the energy transition through industrial climate strategies. This is why our first plenary session of the PTEC Ministerial today is on this topic, because as the U.S. and Europe continue to adapt their net zero and industrial energy policies over the course of a very busy political season, it's imperative that we continue to align our climate and energy goals together, including through industrial policy. To have this conversation, I'm very excited today to be joined by an esteemed group of panelists, beginning to my left with State Secretary for Romania, from the Romanian Ministry of Energy, Dan Dragan, Péter Szijjártó, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade for Hungary, Krzysztof Bolesta, oh sorry, I'm getting out of my order here. Oh, I got it right. Krzysztof Bolesta, Deputy Minister for Climate and Energy from Poland, and concluding on the far side here, the First State Secretary of the Ministry of Economy for Slovakia, Kamil, Šaško. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. It's really great to have this conversation today. Secretary of State Dragan, industrial policies are increasingly the backbone for catalyzing deployment of the energy transition. We've heard Secretary Granholm talk about it. I just reflected on the fact that there's reports and thinking in the European Commission as we enter a new commission on these exact topics. How has EU industrial climate and energy policy evolved over the past few years, and how is Romania addressing the climate crisis through through industrial policy?
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I have also the opportunity to talk about energy policy on Romania and how we are facing in the last years all these challenges. We know that everything, let's say, started previously with the Green Deal policy developed and promoted by the European Commission. Then we started with the pandemic situation when industry has to face very high prices and challenges in terms of ways for buying and having a sustainable, reliable partner for supplying raw materials. Then we faced the third challenge that started with the Russian aggression against Hungary, against Ukraine, when we have to find another ways to stop some routes and to find new reliable partners that will allow to continue the activities. All these three challenges bring important challenges to all the industrial sectors, especially to energo-intensive sectors. In order to face all these challenges, Romanian Ministry of Energy allowed access to all this industry to more flexible instrument for financing, new financing in order to become, for all these customers, industrial customers, to become more independent from energy sources. Therefore, we succeeded and helped them to find new sources of providing raw materials, if we are referring to gas and oil. And also we provide them instruments in order to install their own production facilities in terms of renewable energy. All these measures helped the industry to pass this time period. And if we just look back on the REPowerEU, which is a significant instrument for industries, we noticed that two main challenges the industrial sector have to face in this decade. One is transition to lower their GHG emissions. This is very, very important. And the second one is the digitalization and increase in efficiency use of energy. We noticed in the last couple of years a significant progress in this respect, and all the instruments that we provide in terms of investment in increasing the efficiency in industries, reduction of raw materials, new reliable ways for supplying natural gas and oil to industry, especially to petrochemical industry, is very important in order to reach and to increase the stability and to keep the industry on the European continent. It's very, very important also to give the access to industry to sustainable prices, and not just sustainable on short term, but also on long term. Therefore, also increasing investment in networks, in transmission and distribution is very, very, very important, because all these new capacity of renewables, all these new prosumers, industrial companies that are producing their own energy and which are able to provide to the grid the surplus in some moment, to be part of the overall energy transition in Romania.
You know, Secretary of State, I think looking at the challenges that you outlined in terms of the transition in addressing emissions and this concept of digitalization, they really reflect the near-term urgency of the evolution of the energy system, but also why we're doing this in long-term goals. One country that's been thinking about making legal commitments to net zero 2050 is Hungary. Minister Szijjártó, Hungary was one of the first countries globally to make a legal commitment to become carbon neutral by 2050. What kind of industrial policy have you found successful in this progression to carbon neutrality, and how have these policies evolved since making the commitment in June 2020?
Good morning. Thank you so much to the organizers for the invitation. Thank you for the Romanian government for the usually amazing hospitality which we have here in Bucharest. You're right, we have made it very clear and legally binding that by 2050, Hungary will reach the carbon neutrality status. We get there step by step, so by 2030, we have the goal of 90% of our electricity generation must be carbon neutral. What is the economic and industrial impact on that? May I summarize it in 2 points. First, we are a country which has no oil or gas fields, and we are a landlocked country. We consider our country beautiful, therefore we don't want to ruin the landscape by windmills. So therefore, the two ways we can generate electricity in big volume in a reliable way and in an environmentally protective way is nuclear and solar. Now, when it comes to nuclear, we all know that there are a lot of ideologically motivated debates going on about nuclear energy, and I'm happy that in this regard, the majority of the EU member states and the United States can work together as pro-nuclear countries. Currently, we have 50% of the electricity generated in Hungary generated by nuclear. And we have decided to build 2 new reactor blocks which will be connected to the grid by the beginning of the next decade. They will add 2,400 megawatts to the already existing 2,000 megawatt performance. These 2 new reactors will help us to increase the share of nuclear when it comes to generating electricity to 70%. And with these 2 new reactor blocks, we will be able to decrease the emission of ours by 17 million tons of CO2 on an annual basis. And we can reduce our gas imports by around 2.5 to 3 billion cubic meters, annually speaking. With the nuclear investment, we will create 3,000 jobs directly and around 11,000 indirectly. The construction and the operation of the 2 new blocks will increase our GDP for the 60-year-long period, somewhere between $50 and $65 billion. The 2 new reactors will ensure the safe and carbon-neutral supply of electricity to 1.8 million households in Hungary. If we compare the nuclear investment to any other carbon-neutral electricity generation investments, we see that this multiplicator impact on economy is the best when it comes to the nuclear investments. May I also say that we are in the preparatory phase to initiate the prolongation of the lifetime existence of the already operating 4 reactor blocks of ours, adding to a 2,000 megawatt of performance. Now, when it comes to solar, during the last 8 years, we have increased our, during the last 5 years, we have increased our solar capacity 8 times. Currently, we have a 6,700 megawatt solar performance in the country, which has reached 47% of the entire power plant capacity of the country. The second point, how the carbon neutrality can contribute to our economic performance, comes through automotive industry. Hungary is in a unique position. We are when it comes to automotive industry. We are one of the 3 countries in the world where all 3 German premium car makers are having factories. All 3 of them have located very important aspects of their electricity strategy into Hungary. And we are the only country in Europe where 5 of the top 10 biggest electric battery manufacturing companies are present. All of them are Eastern, of course, among them the market leader. And they cooperate very, very tightly with the German automotive companies. So German electric cars running on Chinese electric batteries. This is the reality, and they are working together in Hungary very tightly. Imagine there are Chinese and German factories which have been built on neighboring plots, not only in the same city, same country, but on neighboring plots in order to be able to supply each other. Now, if you are not able to carry out the electricity transition, the electric transition of the automotive industry and transportation, we will not be able to reach our climate goals and environmental goals. Therefore, I do believe that the electromobility transition will have a huge impact on the European economy. Currently, Hungary has the 4th largest capacity of production of electric batteries. As the big investments happening in Hungary now will conclude, we will be number 2 in the world. We are not targeting position number 1 because that's China, and we don't want to put unrealistic expectations before ourselves. So, nuclear industry, solar industry, and the transition of the automobile industry. These are 3 main pillars of our long-term growth, and they are all stemming from our position of becoming carbon neutral by 2050.
We'll have an opportunity to dig into the critical mineral supply chain and supply chains a little bit later, which I think relates to this conversation about China and batteries. And immediately preceding this conversation, we had a discussion about nuclear, and I think reflecting on the consequence and the long-term nature of those relationships, it was really important to watch the growing aspect of Romania's relationship with nuclear as well with the United States. So excited to see that growth. Deputy Minister Bolesta, I keep seeing a trend on Twitter, and it's showing Poland's GDP vis-a-vis other countries, and it's on a very nice trajectory. But when I look at that, I also reflect on the fact that Poland has one of the most carbon-intensive economies in Europe, with an energy mix that historically had a significant weight of coal in the mix. So having a country that has a strong industry to begin with, how is industrial policy playing a role in decarbonizing Poland's economy and promoting diversification and energy security of resources as well?
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It's great to be on the panel, and not only because I'm very close to the air conditioning units. I think I just wanted to point out three things in terms of what industrial policy role is in a transition. I think, first of all, we need to realize that energy transition is basically a very big societal change. So people is naturally afraid of change, and industrial policy, for me, is a way of assuring them that we can still have growth, we can still have jobs, and we can change our energy mix. So that's number one. Number two is that this is a new paradigm of energy security. Industrial policy in the European Union for some time, we've been relatively naive about energy transition. We didn't really care from where the technology came from. We just wanted to reduce emissions. Now we have finally embraced that, access to raw materials, critical raw materials, access to clean tech. This is something that is part of industrial policy, new industrial policy, but it is also very much part of energy security. And, for example, Poland will take the presidency of the European Union after Hungary in 6 months, more or less. And one of our priorities of our presidency will be to design or to think about the new paradigm of European energy security. And for me, this is very much, includes also a component of industrial policy. Because we should really care where the technology is coming from. And we should really make sure that it's also produced in Europe. Because you can only go to a mining region and say, listen, we have an energy transition, we have an industrial transition, but there will be jobs, there will be growth, don't worry. And it will be affordable. And that's the point number 3 of the role of industrial policy, growth and jobs. And let me give you just 3 stories that, for me, from Poland, signify what the future could look like. You mentioned batteries. Poland today is leading the European market in manufacturing of batteries for cars. One factory, which is owned by LG Chem, has invested €3 billion, and it's currently responsible for almost 2% of Polish exports. One factory is responsible for 2% of Polish exports. And it's around 10,000 employees, 10,000 jobs. Second example, Solaris Bus, the leading electric bus manufacturer in Europe with 15% of the market. Again, 3,000 jobs, leading exporter in electric buses. And looking into the future, we are expanding our offshore wind capabilities. Well, of course, you cannot do that. You don't have access to the sea. We are quite privileged in that part. So, yeah, exactly. And you have to live with what you have. And so 2 factories that have been announced, 3,000 jobs, parts of offshore wind turbines. So this shows you how industrial policy could play a role and why it is really, really crucial to actually keep people on side with energy transformation, because otherwise we will not do the transformation.
I think we're going to have a very hearty conversation then about the supply chains in a moment here. Before we pivot to this conversation around new reliances on China and others because of the influence they have over the supply chains, I do want to go to Secretary of State Šaško to have a conversation about the transatlantic relationship to date. At last year's PTEC, the United States Department of Commerce and the Slovak Ministry of Economy signed a joint declaration on industrial and commercial cooperation in the energy sector. I think the Deputy Minister just spoke of the importance of indigenous jobs and opportunities affiliated with the energy transition, but PTEC is founded in the idea that we are stronger in a transatlantic partnership, so that does include North America as well. How has this agreement helped foster bilateral cooperation on energy infrastructure in your country, and what kind of public-private partnerships have you found to be particularly successful as an outcome in the past year over this process?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and also on my side, thank you for the organization and great hospitality of the hosts here. I will react to your question, but perhaps if I may make some general remarks on what the distinguished speakers before me said, and perhaps to put something not controversial but more fruit for the discussion. Because when I see the topic of this panel, and it often comes to my mind that the role of industrial policy in strengthening energy security. And I'm thinking whether it should not be turned around, whether the energy security not as a goal, but as a tool to achieve the new industrial policy for Slovakia, for Hungary, for Poland, for Romania, for Europe, to be competitive at the global stage. Because I'm sometimes missing this from our discussions also at the European level, not undermining any climate goals which are necessary, which are crucial, but the industrial perspective is often missed, and for countries like Slovakia that are heavily industrial based, this is causing certain, let's call it, challenges. From the energy perspective, we in Slovakia are proud of our energy mix. We already, the combination of the nuclear and renewables is over 80%. By the introduction of the new nuclear blocks with the ambitious, in particular, and agree a lot with what Minister Szijjártó was saying in terms of the construction of the photovoltaics, and on top of that we have the great wealth of the hydro power from the hydropower plants. I'm not afraid on the cleanness of the energy production in Slovakia. Now the question is how we can distribute this clean energy to the end users, to our industry, which need transformation, decarbonization. So I'm talking about the modernization of the grid, of the transmission systems. This requires a lot of investment, and that's where we focus a lot in Slovakia. Now, the ultimate goal, and I'm coming to your question, is, and that's why I said at the beginning that energy trilemma, so not only security, but also sustainability and affordability. That's the key, affordable energy prices for our households and industries, how we can deliver this to make sure that we can switch to the new growth model of our economies that must be reacting to the challenges in order for us to stay competitive on the global market. So we need to look for new models in terms of building the clusters with our especially neighboring states. I'm talking about the battery industry, where Poland and Hungary in particular, the two countries are doing great jobs. Of course, the question of the sources is very relevant. We want to transform and be more active in the semiconductor business. In transformation, I fully agree that the fundamental challenge is the transformation of our automotive sector. That's the key challenge. And this altogether will require energy, and international cooperation and bilateral cooperation play a significant role. We have cooperations with many partners, including the transatlantic, in particular in nuclear, in the field of the SMR, in the field of the nuclear fuel. We just yesterday, our company Slovenské elektrárne signed the deal with Framatome on the new source, new nuclear fuel. We have the similar MOU signed with the Westinghouse. So I often say that diversification is crucial, but we need to make sure that we do not come from one reliance to the other one. And that's what we need to have in mind.
Secretary of State Dragan, I want to give you a chance to reflect on your colleague from Slovakia's comments about energy security as a tool for achieving a new industrial policy in a moment in the wake of Russia's ill-advised and aggression in Ukraine and the pursuant energy crisis that's come from that. You know, is industrial policy there to promote energy security, or is energy security an application for a new industrial policy?
Yes, what we have noticed after the unprovoked aggression of Russia against Ukraine, Europe realized that we rely on mostly one source of raw materials, one source of natural gas and oil. And from this perspective, we realize that it's very, very important to have diversified route more reliable partners in this respect. And of course, with more sources of supplying, of course, the security has to increase. In this respect, I think Romania has is well positioned in terms that already 80% of the natural gas is produced locally, onshore, and we expect by 2027 to be able to cover all the internal needs, all the raw materials, all the energy needed for industry on domestic market, onshore and offshore. Of course, we have a responsibility also to provide security in the region, which is very, very important. And I am pretty sure that Romania will play a significant role in this development and security in the region. The second, one of the main pillars, as already my colleagues already mentioned, is the increase of renewable sources. Here we have to, because there is a source that will need huge investments, that's for sure, installing new generation facilities, but also in terms of network on the transport and distribution, also to increase cooperation and exchange with the neighboring country, new capabilities for transfer of electricity, when will be a surplus of solar in Hungary and will be a surplus of wind production in Romania. So all the region has to increase the interconnectivity in order to bring security and reliable electricity to end customers. One important pillars in terms of providing non-fossil generation is nuclear, and here Romania also is conducting and have significant project on the pipelines, 2 additional units in Cernavoda, that means 1.4 gigawatt, additional gigawatt by 2030, 2031. And also we want to be the first movers in this new technology on small modular reactors. And we hope that the transformation of the old coal generation facilities to a new non-fossil generation unit with security, providing security, an electricity that having no CO2 emissions will be a good signal for industries. Of course, all this investment will have to rely on the industries, with not only equipment and provided by third parties, but also we have to increase our internal production inside the European Union in order to have a circular economy. So all this money that we are investing in new generation facilities, enforcement of the grid, has to have a significant multiplication in the industries. And as a matter of fact, we are seeing that, and we are foreseeing that continuing developing of generation facilities on new technology will have to bring additionally around 30–40% local industries support.
Minister Szijjártó, I think, there's a little bit of a distinguishing factor between some of the comments today. You spoke of a very international and externally focused conversation in terms of both the Russian nuclear power plants and the Chinese batteries. I think some of your colleagues here are talking very much from a European indigenous policy perspective. At a moment when you're looking at the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism having an impact about a very harmonious European perspective on energy transition, on industrial policy, how are you squaring this up, and how are you thinking about international trade in the context of what you're undertaking?
Well, I think when we speak about the safe supply of energy, we should not forget about the fact that the energy supply is being based on physical reality. So in order to deliver gas, in order to deliver oil, you need pipelines. So pipelines, namely the infrastructure, definitely does determine with whom you can cooperate, from where you can purchase. Look at the situation of Hungary, for example, when it comes to oil. We have a certain amount what we need to supply the country, and Slovakia does need a certain amount. I put these two countries together because we are on the same line. And the pipeline leading from Russia through Ukraine supplies us basically entirely. Why? Because there's no other alternative route. We would be very happy to put into consideration the diversification, but the precondition of the diversification is alternative routes of supply. Now, a pipeline from Croatia is leading to the countries of ours, but the problem is that it has a very limited capacity. 2 years ago, when the oil ban was first put on the agenda of the European Union, both of us, Slovaks and Hungarians, we have turned to the European Commission to make it sure that Croatia increases the capacity of this pipeline so we can diversify the sources. Now what happened? European Union reached out to the Croats, but it was not the capacity which was increased because it's still the same, but the transit fee was increased 5 times. So here there's a problem. Second problem, when it comes to gas. We are the first country which is not neighboring Turkey, but is buying Turkish gas this year. And this year, first time ever, we started deliveries from Azerbaijan. Now, why we can do it in a very limited way, in a very limited quantity, which does not allow us for entire diversification, is that the pipeline network in the southeast European region, which connects us to Azerbaijan, Turkey, Qatar, is very limited, very limited. So we have turned to the European Commission together with Slovakia, with Romania, with Bulgaria, Serbia and Greece, asking the European Union to finance the increase of the capacity of the Southeast European pipeline network in order to enable Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania to buy more gas from diversified sources. What was the answer of the European Commission? Sorry guys, gas is not being sexy anymore. Gas is not going to be part of the national energy mix in 15 years, so EU is not ready to invest into that infrastructure. So here we are without the physical chance of diversification. And that's a problem because it's not a political issue. If you want to buy gas or oil from different sources, you need the pipelines, you need the network, and if it's not there and nobody is helping you to get it, and you are privileged, you are at the sea, but we are a landlocked country, so our infrastructure is determined by the neighboring countries as well, and if they are not ready to help you, then you cannot enjoy the full liberty of the wish of diversification. So, therefore, nuclear is really important for us because there we can produce what we consume. And my final sentence is that the nuclear project in Hungary is a very international one, because you rightly said that the main contractor is the Russian company Rosatom, based on a contract signed back in 2014. But the major subcontractors are German, French, American, Swiss, and even Austrian. So a huge international project with big European and American companies involved, which makes us happy because it's a form of diversification, that at least there's an industrial cooperation from other parts of the world and of the European continent as well.
Thank you, Minister. Unquestionably, physical infrastructure has a very strong impact on the relationships and the energy security of each country. It does strike me, though, that there's a divergence in terms of how we're creating a virtual pipeline of critical minerals. And I want to go to Deputy Minister Bolesta because, you know, I'm seized by your conversation on the batteries and the success of industrial policy in your country. And interested to broaden this conversation away from just fixing infrastructure of oil and gas, but to also look at combating our dependence on Chinese mineral supply chains and how this action in industrial policy will allow the EU to compete on the global stage and develop and deploy these clean energy technologies, because I do think we don't want to go from one dependence on Russian gas and then introduce a new dependence in the case of Chinese supply chain. So I think there is a conversation that it's not just fixed infrastructure, and would love your reflection on that.
Yeah, I think this is basically the gist. So why we are doing this? Because energy could be, and we see to the east, it is a weapon. And switching away from fossil fuels, imported fossil fuels, will have us to reduce our import bill. But we have to remember this could create another dependency on imported clean tech. And it could be a weapon as well. That's why the Critical Mineral Materials Act, and for me, the essence of the act is the benchmarks that we've set ourselves in Europe. So for 2030, we have an ambition to source 10% of our capacity of raw materials from Europe, 40% to have processing of raw materials in Europe, and 25% of recycling. So these benchmarks, I think, are key in making sure that we have a value chain, because today we don't have value chain. Like, I love the battery factory we have in Poland, and, you know, battery packs are produced in Poland. But, you know, the cells are all imported, and the critical raw materials are all imported. And there is not a single facility recycling these things. So they leave the country and they come back as new cells. So we really need to step up the effort and create a value chain, European value chain, that is safe, that it's, you know, impacts our economy, creates growth, jobs, and also protects us from, you know, situations like we have today in fossil fuels. So that's why we're doing this, and I think it's really key to focus on making this right, to actually avoid situations like you described, you know, where, you know, all of a sudden we don't have enough capacity to send stuff over. I think building this well from scratch will protect us to the future, proves us against these kind of crises.
Minister Šaško, I want to give you the floor on a very similar issue here. Being the lone voice from the United States, a friendly voice from the Atlantic Council, I'm interested, you know, in terms of this competitiveness angle and who are we competing against. Obviously, competition is fundamental in pushing our industry to be better, to have better products for consumers, to have better prices for consumers. But ultimately, there is an undercurrent of security in this conversation as well. What's your reaction to how the EU remains competitive in the clean energy transition and competes on these very strongly dominated supply chains, particularly in the clean energy sector?
Well, it's complicated. And you know, I always try to say that we need, because the goals that we set at the EU level, at the national level, are very serious. And to make it serious and to achieve them, sometimes we need, and I truly believe that, less ideology and to be more realistic about what we are doing at the national level, but also at the EU level. And we need to be honest to ourselves, also, and in particular, in between friends in the EU, the member states, and try to understand and listen to each other, because the issues that Minister Szijjártó was highlighting, that are absolutely relevant in terms of the infrastructure, both especially for the landlocked countries like Slovakia, like Hungary, both in terms of the gas infrastructure, where this ideology said that no, we will not invest, yet we need to diversify, and yet there is no other option, and the reality is now here. And the same thing goes with the oil. Then when we talk about the clean tech, and also for the transformation, for example, of the automotive sector, so the batteries and the photovoltaics, we know that the goals are ambitious. At the current moment, we, as Europe, do not have the resources. And it's questionable whether we will have these resources in 5 years or in 10 years. right? So we need to have all this in mind when we want to achieve what we want to achieve. And one thing in terms of the collaboration and cooperation, both at the transatlantic level and also at the European level, and I often miss that from discussion at such platforms, is that at the end of the day we will solve the money, we will solve the challenges. But one thing that we need to, I believe, truly believe, that need to talk much more serious is the human capital. Who is going to do that? You know, to have the value chains, not only about the materials, but also about the human sources. We have big plants in Poland, in Hungary, in Czech Republic, in Romania, for example, in the nuclear industry. We need to make sure that we communicate and we distribute the whole teams of people, of skilled people, to make sure that we can achieve that. So it's not only about material, not only about the finance, but also about the human capital, and this should be more and more on the top of the agenda of our discussions.
Gentlemen, thank you for this fruitful conversation. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It does seem, though it's complex, there are areas of agreement. I think seizing on the human capital aspect, their vision of the need for jobs and creating a value chain in Europe. I hope we can do that through the PTEC Ministerial and also a transatlantic fashion. Speaking and quoting Minister Barduja this morning, he encouraged us to be courageous together, and so might we do that in our industrial policy as well. Thank you for your time, and please join me in thanking the panelists for their time today.
Thank you, Landon, for moderating yet another very interesting and challenging conversation. Thank you.